The Olympic Games are unlike any event, drawing the collective eyes of the world to a singular focus. More than ever, because of the pandemic, the world's citizens crave community. In this discussion, we will explore the future of sport and community through the lens of the Olympics with, as previously mentioned, Paul J. Foster and Christina Lowe. So welcome, Paul and Christina.
Thanks, Alicia. Thanks. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Paul. Thanks, Alicia. It's good to be here.
To get things started, over a year ago, the world was forced to slow down, shut down, and go home because of COVID-19. Data show us that during that time, eSport participation and consumption increased. Was it the pandemic alone that drove this, or what factors have caused growing participation in eSports? So I'll kick it off to you, Paul and Christina.
Thanks, Alicia. Great to be with you guys this afternoon. I think that what we have to say is that we're in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution. I don't know if we're in the middle of it, Alicia, but we're certainly in it. I think that as a consequence of that, the whole notion around artificial intelligence and mobile and Internet of Things and this whole incredible technological age that embraces immersive technologies is there. Along comes the pandemic and hits the accelerator fast and hard. And so that did a few things, as you would know, I'm sure Christina would agree, is that traditional sport, both Christina and I came from the Olympic movement, having worked at the IOC for in my case, 20 years, from my hometown in Sydney right through to the Games in London in 2012. And really what that did is it froze all of that, right? So all the traditional sport froze. And then all of us that love sport, and as you said, Alicia, love community, start to look inward and think, okay, so what are we going to do? And then a month turned into a month, and 3 months turned into 6. And so it was what I would consider a confluence of the various factors that you mentioned. The fact is that the technology is there. The fact is this emerging economy. The fact is this engagement. I know we'll talk about it in a little bit, I think, around social engagement and community building. And then at the same time, this kind of acceptance around learning online and considering how we would participate with these incredible technologies around that have been offered and presented to us in the fourth industrial revolution. So I think it's a confluence of all of that. And a lot of folks talk about it in the line of, like, Chris, I don't know what you think about this. They talk about the future, of esports. I mean, it's right now. I mean, we're absolutely in the epicenter of what we're talking about. And I know the previous panel was also talking about it. Everyone's talking about it, and we're trying to navigate it.
Yeah, I mean, it really actually was on a fast growth pattern before the pandemic. It's just that this kind of like a fuel injected era, right? The pandemic, where it's just completely expedited the growth, not just with, the traditional generations as well, Paul, which you probably get more insight in with the age groups there, but also with a older age group as well, as far as participation. And there's this rise of like the social component of esports or gaming, okay, where, when you're actually locked up at home or in shelter in place, it's like, where else do you go? Right. I was actually thinking about this morning about the topic, because it's like, I remember pre-pandemic, we were like, how do we get the kids away from the screens? Right. And then suddenly the pandemic came and you're like grappling to go, okay, got to get a subscription on Zoom. Okay. And then suddenly everyone in that household is fighting for the internet. And it is quite interesting how that's kind of like shifted with the pandemic. And also we had a brief chat about this the other day, Paul, right? About how accessible it is to get online and utilize all these different games and being part of esports, and just actually even just dialing in just the other day. I had some issues getting onto Zoom, but it's like the different countries that are participating in esports. It has a lot to do with having access as well, and the kind of infrastructure that's available. So I don't know, Alicia, I hope that answers your question there. It's a pretty diverse amount of input we're getting here. Back to you.
Awesome that we're living in the fourth industrial revolution. And I think of myself as a professor. The crazy thing about being a professor is you keep getting older and the students keep getting younger. And so now I get to tell my students that I was alive before the internet. So I seem really old. So that great response is really interesting. Based upon what you said, One thing that stands out to me is esports is unlike traditional stick and ball sports in that a player in the United States can be competing against a player in Saudi Arabia, for instance, both in the comfort of their own homes. How is the immersivity and connectivity of esports allowing the sport industry at large to reimagine and build community?
Yeah, this is awesome to talk about this. And I think what Chris just talked about, Alicia, is also one of the things that struck me was when there was a pause. I mean, as you said in your intro, Alicia, here we are 2 days. I think the opening ceremony of the Tokyo Games is in a couple of days on Friday. And here we are, right, talking about this. Who would have thought? And yet how interesting that is as humans, right, that we have this notion about inertia, like this immediate sort of hesitancy. And then once we get beyond the hesitancy and inertia, we can lean in and participate, right? So I think it's true about all sports. I think it might be worthwhile giving you at least what I consider the definition of esports, what it is, right? So I summarize it as 4 words. Organized competitive video games. So like a lot of you, I was born in the 70s and sort of moved into esports and gaming in the 80s and you know, as a teenager. So we played video games, right? We all know what that is. And then esports is the organized competitive nature of that. And I believe that's what makes it a sport, right? So that we know that the more we practice, the better we get. The fact that, as you said, Alicia, in your question, that I can compete in a sport, doesn't matter where I am in the world, against each other, skill against skill. And I think what's been absolutely interesting is not only as we as people and humans and families and parents and schools and communities have thought about it, but also how sport itself has thought about it. And I'm sure Christina could talk about that, how sport, traditional sport, has actually looked at digital themselves. Some of the most traditional sports in the world, Christina and I were involved in at the Olympic movement, some really traditional sports, really studying through the lens of digital. Now, obviously you had sports such as football with FIFA, you know, soccer, and basketball and others that are highly developed and looking at this. But then a lot of the sports had never looked at it. Some really hesitated, like almost definitely said, absolutely not, never, ever. And then what I think it's done is when you consider that you look around a lot of empty stadia around the world and think about audience participation, it makes you think about the future of your sport. So I think that, yeah, absolutely, this immersive technology that I'd love to talk about, this powerful immersive technology that really sees the body as a controller, right? In the old days, we used to have like controllers, or we'd have joysticks, or we'd have different types of controllers. And now really, we're starting to see our physicality become really a controller as we start to really be totally immersed through this technology.
Yeah, no, I love that, Paul. You know, and just taking that another step across, you know, horizontally as well, you know, with this whole international global reach, you know, it closes the gap to interconnectivity. It really banishes the whole discussion about, oh, I didn't know, you know, anyone who lives in Japan. Now it's like, okay, well, actually, most of the friends that I play, you know, on esports games are from Japan, and it closes that gap of exposure with people from different cultures and backgrounds. I mean, it doesn't even become a question about cultures and backgrounds at that point, right? It's like you're all playing in the same pool, or you're playing on the same side, you know, on you know, through esports. Is it kind of like diminishes that all these differences that are really highlighted through social injustices as well. So
I think also one of the things we should say is that there's something for everything in this space, right? There's something for everyone in this space, right? So whether or not you look at, like, whether you look at mind sports, or whether you look at, you know, traditional esports, or whether you look at first-person shooter games, or you look at strategy games, there's really something. I think, Alicia, also what Chris said there was that a lot of what we tell is through storytelling, through others as well, what we learn through personal journeys. And I was speaking to a president of one of the Olympic federations the other day, who's based in Santiago, Chile. And he said 9 months ago, I spoke to him, and I spoke to him, I think, on Friday. So there was 9 months in between conversations. And he said, Paul, I've totally changed my view. He had a very conservative view, a very hesitant view prior. And he said, you know, during these last 9 months, my son, my 20-year-old son, who's a university student, an engineering student in Santiago, said, you know, he's met hundreds of friends around the world through gaming that he's never would have never met, even if he could travel. And at the same time, he said to me, he's learned English. Now, these were his words. This is absolutely a true story. These were his words. He's learned English. He's taken his English skills from 5.5 out of 10, let's say, through to about 7.5 out of 10. So he's really understood, as Chris said, this kind of immersive technology on one hand, secondly, this acceptance, and what we talk about at the Global Esports Federation around the power of the values that we talk about in terms of, especially it allows us the space to talk about equality, inclusion, innovation, and diversity, and as well as fair play. So it allows it for those conversations to take place.
Awesome. So as you both were speaking, I was thinking of a quote from Nelson Mandela that begins with, "Sport has the power to change the world." So often in our society's history, sport has been a catalyst for change. But what's different to me from traditional stick and ball sports, who especially in the last year where we're dealing with a period of social unrest and calls for social change in the United States, is the stick and ball sports didn't have values and policies implemented that led to inclusivity, diversity, and acceptance from their founding. Can you talk about how your respective organizations are changing that on its head and beginning and emerging with value-centric organizations, and why that's important?
Okay, I can start off with that, Paul. Yeah. So I represent an organization called Oakland Roots. It's a purpose-driven professional sports club. We have a professional men's soccer team and we're actually part of the USL Division 2 here in the States. And how all this evolved was, the hook that really got me, it's purpose-driven. And I actually asked the question, well, what does that mean? Because my entire sports career has always been, Chris, we got to meet targets, end of year, targets, got to make more sales, bring more sponsorships, bring more like broadcast relationships on board, sell advertising. Okay. And it was just so enlightening to me. It was like, okay, Chris, purpose driven here actually means using the power of sport and, promoting it as a force for social good. And an example of that is, so we've literally partnered with, a pretty strong group of community colleges in Oakland. I have to admit, it's like it's not an easy road finding a venue for our guys to play the sports on, because there's just so many more things on top of just renting out the field. And in order to make decisions through an operational lens, it's like, how can we help these schools? All right, so Laney Football Stadium is one of the venues, our prime venue for our home. And we've worked with them to upgrade, their digital scoreboard so that we can actually have animation and video on there. On game day, they've got an amazing culinary program that they're struggling with bringing students on. So we worked with them to bring their students, to design a la carte menus for our guests and our fans on game day. So indirectly, it's also promoting their program and also giving the students an opportunity to actually have front facing with, the consumers. That's just one example. Another one is Common Goal. We're one of the first professional clubs in the US to partner in Common Goal, where we actually provide like 1% of our salaries to promote and tackle social injustices around the world. These are just a couple of examples how we've put purpose first. And we could have actually just rented out one of the amazing stadiums out here in the Bay Area to play our game. But, the hard work, the commitment in driving, sports through social good and impacting those different kinds of environments, it's like that's held true with all of our hearts here.
Yeah, and I think Alicia, it was amazing work Chris is doing at her organization, and very inspiring for all of us. I think similarly to us, we started our organization, the Global Esports Federation, by thinking about it as a convening platform rather than a traditional governing body, with a very pyramidal scheme. And of course, we have a board that was appointed, and they'll stand for election in the future. We really thought about how we could include the voices of so many from around the world, highly inclusive. So that was the first thing I think we thought about. The second thing is that what I would suggest is that it's really around community, right? Authenticity and community. So the voice in esports is quite interesting, right? When you participate in this space, you really participate where the gamers and the esport athletes are playing, right? You're right in their space. So in terms of Generation Z, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, I mean, you are participating there. So you've got to be very close to the grassroots. You've got to be very close to the gamer community, the publishers, the changes in technology. It's moving exceptionally rapidly. You've got to be there. And this links to two things, I think, which I always talk about with our team, which is around resonance and relevance. So are you resonant with that audience? Otherwise you're not. It's quite simple. And are you relevant? Because if you're not, you're not. Right. So there's two things. And it's a very humbling thing for a guy like me who's who's learned this, taking what we say the credibility, legitimacy, prestige of sport, traditional sport, and bringing it to esport without sort of taking out any of the great energy and creativity from that realm. As Chris mentioned too, we and one thing I've noticed in that whole space is really the generosity, Alicia, of the community. I think the esports community is a community that is incredibly generous. Coming with that generosity is tremendously honest, and sometimes that hurts, right? Sometimes that honesty can come pretty direct and pretty straight, and that's I think that's a good message for us socially as we consider this current moment in our social evolution. But as Chris mentioned too, we definitely have our events portfolio. We have global events right around the world that feel different in Asia to the Americas, to Africa, to Oceania, and to Europe. But we thought that wasn't enough. And we also wanted to participate in this global social impacts, what we call the GSIs, the Global Social Impact Initiatives, that talk about education, the future of work, that talk about youth, that talk about skills, as we look at the circular economy, as we look at the future of the creative economy, and the fact that everyone wants to participate in this space. So, where could we bring our voice, and how could we, as I say, shine light and create space for that conversation to happen?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Paul. I mean, even just looking at the audiences, the appeal of the types of audiences that are being attracted with being a community first, having a community first approach. When we look into the crowds, it's not the typical crowds that we get when you're actually with, a traditional sports club, right? I mean, they're not all like hardcore, we are big fans of soccer. You see the faces and the different colors of the community, young and old, and they're there for community support. And that is just, it's just so breathtaking to see, and I've seen it transition because, I was born in Liverpool, and, my true birthplace, and I shouldn't be saying this because I know maybe a couple of my colleagues are watching this, but Liverpool Football Club, you look into the audience and people are like screaming and yelling, very rarely do you have like a whole little family there, where they're like completely like overly passionate and maybe borderline aggressive because they're just really into their club. Okay, but when you look into the crowds of Oakland Roots, you see the true faces of the community, and they might not even care about soccer. They're there to support each other, and probably on the esports side as well, and gaming, that kind of appeal and the range of audiences and participants is so diverse, right? Because there's no parameters to be part of that world. Well,
this is Alicia, the game changer, right? Which is that we think that fourth industrial revolution, it's a big word, it's a big term, but it comes about because of, as a professor, you would be better equipped to explain this than I am. But this notion of a moment in time, we move from the third industrial revolution, digital, and we now move towards, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and all the other technologies that are afforded to us. What it calls into question is the way we consider, as Chris mentioned, the way we want to be entertained, right? I say in the old days, which means about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we went to an event and we watched an event. Now we go to an event, and the previous panel was talking about the first LAN events coming up. Now, we go to an event and we have social media to inform us about what our heroes were eating last night, or what they're wearing, or where they hang out and what they do. We want to consume all of that. So really what we talk about is this convergence between sport, esports, music, which is called the future of entertainment, and how we want to consume that.
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things that pop into my head as you're speaking, but to tie in based upon what we've been speaking about related to value-centric business development, what lessons can other businesses in sport or otherwise take from what you've done with your organization to grow their own? So what are the big business lessons here?
Chris, I don't know if you don't mind if I jump in on this one. It's I was on a panel the other day, and many of the brands, Alicia, was exactly what you were just saying, which is we want to participate in this space. How do we participate in it? And the game has changed, right? The paradigms have changed. Exactly what you said, which is, and you've seen this through, I'm a big fan of these immersive social media. Our view in terms of social media as well, we have a very robust sort of traditional public relations approach, but we also have a very endemic approach in terms of social media to this space, which is very authentic. So I think it's not one or the other. I think a lot of the brands, Alicia, are trying to navigate the proximity to the audience and to know how that, and that's very difficult, right? Because there's not like a live event where you can go to. Chris, you remember in the Olympic movement, we'd go to the Olympic Games and you could talk to Coca-Cola and you could have talk about their fan engagement, or Samsung, or whoever the big partners were. This is doubly complicated because brands are trying to engage audiences and then they're not able to sort of talk to them and not able to get that traditional feedback. So the lesson is in data, a little bit in the science and the data and the proximity, but people, I think brands, communities, properties need to commit to more time to learn, right? So it's not just like, I'll learn a little bit of esports and I know a little bit about it. You'll appear that you really don't know much about it. And on the previous panel as well, there was conversations about education and bachelor programs and master's programs around esports management and the future of learning as well. And certainly, as a person who's committed to teaching as well, that I think it's something we would support as well, to try to see how can we inform that there needs to be a commitment to learn. It's not just like incremental, there needs to be an awareness. It's changed.
Yeah, I completely agree, Paul. It's like through the broadcast lens, and as Paul mentioned, it's just 2 or 3 years ago, literally, where everything's just kind of like transitioned so quickly. It's like I was back in the world of, all right, let's sponsor this event. You'll get 5 A boards, on the field. All right, you'll get a booth on the side so that you can have interaction with the people who come in the stadium. So now it's like, it's all about data. Okay, how many people are watching the game? Okay, it's like, what kind of interaction do you have here? What's the level of e-commerce integrated into the actual programming itself? What's the transaction time for purchasing something if you see it online, right? But with like esports and gaming, the gaming video content, back in the day, I still remember when they introduced bass fishing, and I was like, are you serious? So you're going to sit there and watch someone fish for bass, right? Okay, now it's like you're sitting there and everyone, all eyes are on this one person or one kid who's playing a video game or on esports, and it's gathering thousands, millions, and billions of eyeballs. Okay, and people like the traditional sponsors and partners are trying to navigate and think, how do I get part of that? How do I transition my brand message to appeal to that audience, right? And it's that gap. It's like, how do you transition from traditional to like the new esports world and gaming world? And I think it's also got a lot to do with your perspective on the reach. A lot to do with what Paul just mentioned, the educational value. It's not just about, I'm going to buy a sponsorship to this event. It's like, hey, you got to increase that educational level about that world so that you can figure out how to support and grow with that world. Gone are the days are where it's like, you get your 10 by 10 booth on the sidelines, and okay, this is the data we want, and this is the target data we want to get to. Okay, and it becomes a long-term partnership after that, right? It's I can't see how sustainable it is to have like a short-term partnership with someone in the gaming world, let alone the esports world.
I want to just call out your mention of e-commerce. If we had more time, there's so much that we could dig into there, but I think that's a key factor of sport moving forward in terms of revenue generation is e-commerce. And then second, what you just finished by saying, the importance of partnership. The trend in the sport industry is no longer sponsorship, it's partnership. And to Paul's point earlier, you can't fake it until you make it. You have to know what you're doing and you have to be an engaged partner. So we are coming to the close of our very quick panel, but I have probably the most important question for our viewers today, which is this: how do you see the future of technology in your industries, and where do community and values factor into that vision?
I mean, for us, I think it's two things. It's about capacity and speed. So one of the things that, so in terms of cloud and the future of seamlessness and frictionless technology, that's what we're all about. And it's the ability to go fast. And then because the moving my fingers at slightly a slower pace cost me the win, right? So that's what it's about. The thing that disappoints us in that discussion is the great amount of work we still have to do in the developing world, right? So in Africa and particularly in Africa, but also in parts of the developing world, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and other parts of the world, that, you know, we're all complaining about the speed of 5G, and, you know, 60% of the world has mobile phone, 40% doesn't. So that's something that concerns us. So that's something that we're also spending time working with the United Nations agencies and folks like UN, the International Telecommunications Union out of Geneva, to think about the future of connectivity around the world, because otherwise it means it's something it's an exclusive thing and it's not a highly inclusive thing. So surely technology is getting smaller. Of course, there's still PC gaming, it's massive, and console gaming, of course, stuff is getting smaller and faster.
Yeah, through the Oakland Roots lens there, okay, I would say transparency through, you know, real-time communication to our fans and our community, and being transparent with our own evolution, and also being available to listen and get the feedback so that we can continue improving, you know, with the delivery, and also supporting the community there. And that you need technology for that, right? So, you know, it's completely focused on building out what those social media platforms are, you know, learning about the engagement and the consumption of media. You know, whether it's through TikTok or any other platform, is where we're evolving all the time, depending on how our community is asking us to evolve. So we work for them.
Awesome. Well, this has been incredible. I think my big takeaways are: listen, lead with values, and engage yourself in the community. And we can always use more development of the cloud. So I guess that's perhaps your technological takeaway. Thank you both so much. This has been so much fun. I hope everybody enjoyed it, and we're really looking forward to the games beginning on Friday. Thank you.